Welcome to Orensha Tech, and in this video we're going to go over providers. In my last video I went over commands, and now we're going to go over some of the data stores that those commands can access and the main structure that PowerShell uses to access data and data stores. Now that is a PS provider, and that gives access to data in a specialized way that makes it easier for viewing and managing that data. And these data stores are all going to appear as drives in PowerShell. And that's familiar to most people as the file and folder structure. So that is how it's going to look. But this goes well beyond that into things like the Windows registry, environment variables, Active Directory, and a lot more. So let's look at some of those PS providers by running git ps provider. So here we can see we have registry, alias, environment, file system, function, variable, certificate, WSMan. So these are some of the providers that we have on the Windows environment natively inside of PowerShell to access. We can also get more providers by adding them in, usually through modules. For instance, Active Directory has a provider that is included when you install the Active Directory module. Now let's look at some of these and break down what we're seeing here. You can see on most of these it has the should process, and that includes things like what if and confirm that are used for testing. So that just gives you a base set of tools that you can use for those providers. Now we can see with the file system, we have filter and credentials. And that means that we get those tools as well for the file system, where we're able to filter and specify the credentials that we're using. And then over here you can see the drives. And this is the format that we're going to see that data in a way that appears like the drive that I mentioned earlier. So let's run git ps drive, and we'll take a look at these drives that we are able to access. So we have alias here, we have our C drive, cert, environment, we have our two registry drives here. So these are the actual starting points for the data stores that we're able to access. And the basic way to access the data inside the PS providers is through a term called an item. And that is what most of the things inside the providers are referred to. For instance, a file and a folder are both referred to as items, though obviously those are different types of items. And some examples of this are get item, clear item, new item property. So let's dig into providers, and we'll start off with the file system since most people are going to be familiar with that. In the file system, we have folders, which can be defined as containers, and then we have files, which can be defined as endpoints. Now, like I mentioned, both files and folders are going to be referred to as items. So when we run a command like get item, it can grab both files and folders. And then when we look at folders, they're going to have something called a child item, which is an item contained within a hierarchical item structure. So we've got the folders, and then inside of those folders could potentially be more folders or files, and the items inside are going to be the child items. Now let's break down the commands for the items. We have the verbs, and these are things like clear, copy, get, move, new, remove, rename, set, and these can apply to any item, file, or folder. And then we have our nouns, which the main one is going to be item, but then we have item property and child item, as well as others. And these terms are intentionally generic, as they are intended to work with a wide variety of data stores, like we can see here, the registry, certificates, and the file system. And some of the commandlets are not going to really make sense for some of these PS provider items. For instance, the file system doesn't support transaction capability, so none of the use transaction parameters are going to work on those items. And the environment PS provider doesn't have access to item properties. So let's run get item property path environment PS module path. You can see here, property commandlet provider interface is not supported by this provider. So it's not always going to make sense that some of these commandlets work for these provider items. And this is probably the most confusing part about providers, because it tries to make it very generic so that it can be fully encompassing of all the different data types and try to give commands that are going to work for all of them most of the time. Now let's look at navigating the file system. So we have a command set location, and this is going to change the location of where we are in our drive. So let's go here and we set ourselves at the root of our drive there. So that's going to be similar for all of our other drives, such as registry or alias. We can navigate through by using the set location command. Now in non-Windows operating system, PowerShell still gives us these PS drives, and we can use that get PS drive tool to see exactly what we have available to us on our operating system. So it's super awesome that PowerShell gives us these easy to understand structures for our data to be able to navigate and use and run commands against to get data or manipulate data or change data. So let's look at one of those commands. We've got new item, and we're going to run the help for that to see exactly what this command is about. And specifically, we're going to look at this parameter right here, item type. So if we go down and find item type, we can see some of the different types of items that we can create with new item. So if we're using file system drive, then we can specify file, directory, symbolic link, junction, hard link. These are the different types of items that we can create. And if we go down here for certificates, you can see we have certificate provider, certificate, store location. So for each of our drives, we're going to have different types of items that we can create. And if we want to learn more about this, we can always run the help about providers. And I do recommend that everyone just pull this up and look through it, look through the basic parts of it. And then if you're really feeling up to it, do a deep dive and read the whole thing. It's going to tell you all about providers and the different types of items there are for each of the providers. Now, most of you are going to be familiar with the command mkdir, mkdir, and PowerShell actually incorporated this into the shell as an alias for new item, where you don't have to specify what type of item you're making. So we do this, mkdir, and specify our folder, then we don't have to specify the item type there. Although this isn't going to work on non-Windows operating systems because of the conflict with the native command. So this is something purely for Windows, but it's a cool tool that a lot of people are familiar with, and it allows you to skip some of the parameters and also shorten your command there to do exactly what you want to do. All right, next let's move on to specifying paths. When we specify paths, we have wildcards that are available to us. And the two types of wildcards are the star, which stands in for 0 or more characters, or the question mark, which stands in for exactly 1 character. So if we run this command, we can see the wildcard in action. So I grabbed all of the items within my downloads folder that start with T and contain anything after that. It could have been just T, or it could legitimately be anything after that. You can see some of these are pretty long. It just has to start with T. And also I want to point out this right here, which is a part of our environment, drive, if we pull up our environment variables, we have a ton of cool tools. We have a ton of cool variables that are already created for us. And I use this home path to get to my files quickly and then tag on the downloads after. And then if I gave this command to anyone else, they could run the same thing and get their downloads without having to change their home path in the command. So let's look at what if we had the star or the question mark in our file or folder name. Well, PowerShell did provide us something that we could use in this scenario called a literal path. If we use the literal path parameter, then it's going to take what we give it and not treat any of those characters as special characters. It's going to treat the star and the question mark as the actual characters that we want to pass through. All right, lastly, let's look at some other providers besides the file system. So we have our environment drive, and we can look up some of the items there by running git child item env :* And as I was mentioning earlier with the home path variable, we can see all of these different variables that we have at our disposal to use to create more versatile scripts and commands. Some of the cooler ones are the username, the program data, we have app data and local app data, computer name, temp, program files. So there's just a ton of cool variables that are built in to our shell that we can use by accessing our environment drive. And those again can be seen by running git child item env : That's going to give you all of your variables that you have to access. And I love being able to pull up this because it's going to show me things that I don't know exist, and I can start using them and seeing that they're options for me to put into my scripts and commands. Okay, next let's look at the registry. We're going to set our location to HKCU. So now we've changed our location in the shell to our registry drive, and we can access it in a similar way as you'd expect with folders and files. So if we come here and git child item star for wildcard for everything, we can see everything that's contained within that drive. So it's a cool way to come in and be able to run scripts to change anything in the registry, or you can come in here and see the registry in a way that's a little bit easier to navigate than the GUI. Although the GUI is nice, this just gives you that extra layer of functionality to be able to access all of the underlying data on the operating systems that we're working with and managing. I hope you enjoyed that video, and be sure to watch the full series where we start at the very beginning and we're going to go all the way to PowerShell Mastery. Thanks for watching and have a good day.